Here we go. 2.4. Remember, standard form of a complex number is a plus bi. So we want to make sure we're going to write all our answers in a plus bi form. In letter B, I strongly recommend that you put the extra step. When you're subtracting, show the distributive property here. And then again, you're going to collect your like terms. 9 minus 5 is 4. 6i minus I is your 5i. Okay? All right. Letter C. We're going to FOIL this one. So the first, the outer, the inner, and the last. So I'm getting 2 plus 4i plus 6i plus 12i squared. You need to remember that I squared is negative 1. Now I'm putting all the steps in here for anybody who doesn't remember this real well. And then I'll eventually start skipping it. Whenever you see I squared, that means it's negative 1, and you can just always take the opposite. So remember, it has to be in standard form, the real part plus the imaginary part. I will still see you tomorrow. Remember, you're going to bring your homework. We're going to do that. But Monday will be the review day, and Tuesday next week will be our quiz. Okay, letter D. If you have a quantity squared, remember that's that quantity times itself. So 7 plus 2i times 7 plus 2i. Let me give you a head start and you FOIL it. Collect your like terms. Check your answer with the board. I got 45 plus 28i. If you did not, check what happened. I squared's a negative 1. All right, try E and F on your own if you haven't already. Try both of those. Okay, letter E, I got 18 plus 26i, and on F, I got 2 minus 6i. And I do not mind if you're doing these like the subtraction in your head, as long as you're doing them correctly. That's okay. But if you're like missing one of the signs, then don't do that. Do the extra step. Okay? Any questions on this? Do you remember it from last year? Okay, good. Good. All right, in example 2, let me refresh your memory on something called a complex conjugate. Complex conjugates are a plus bi and a minus bi. If I equals the square root of negative 1, then what we know about square roots, you cannot leave a square root in the denominator. So that means I may not be left in the denominator. So what we're going to need to do, when you have a sum or a difference with I in your denominator, you're going to have to multiply by the complex conjugate. So in the numerator, I'm going to use FOIL and get 6 plus 3i minus 2i minus I squared. The denominator is going to be 4 minus I squared, because the purpose of a complex conjugate is to eliminate I in the denominator. And so your outer and inner cancel. That's why I don't need to write them down. Then I get 6 plus I, and then notice that becomes a positive 1 over 4 plus 1. So I'm getting 7 plus I over 5. Now remember what I told you, all of our answers need to be in standard form. This is not a real part plus an imaginary part. This is a real part plus an imaginary part divided by a real part. So I need to break this apart into 7 over 5 plus 1 over 5i. Okay, questions on this? If you have a sum or difference in the denominator, you multiply by the complex conjugate of the denominator. Foil it, simplify it, and write it as a plus bi. Go ahead and try letter B on your own. I'll give you a head start. On your mark, get set, go. Then I'll race you. I just got a brain time. Alright, I'm going to start this one. In the numerator, I get 2 minus 6i minus 4i. Notice it's a plus 12i squared over 1 minus 9i squared. So that's 2 minus 10i, then that becomes minus 12 over 1 plus 9. That's negative 10 minus 10i over 10. That's not in standard form. So I'm going to break it apart. So that's negative 1 minus I. Okay? Now, this doesn't happen in letter C, because when you look at C, what simplification could we do right away? You could get rid of the I. And so that's just negative 7 over 5. All right, let's make a letter D. What if I had 2 over 3i? This is not a sum or difference, so I'm not going to multiply by a conjugate. What can I multiply by that would eliminate I, that would make it go away?
3 halves.
Not 3 halves.
3i over 1.
Not 3i over 1. Just I, right? You're going to multiply the top and the bottom by I, because watch what happens. That's 2i over 3i squared. So that's negative 2/3 I. Okay. So we've added, subtracted, multiplied, and divided. Now we're going to simplify radical expressions. And what I need to tell you, don't write this down, okay? Don't write this next part down. If I would multiply what's underneath there first, negative 3 times negative 12 is 36. And that would give me 6. Okay, don't write that down, it's just wrong. Here's what I need to tell you to do, but I want to demonstrate why we need to do it the way that we do. Anytime you have a negative under the radical, you need to pull the I out. So this is going to be, now you can write below the line. This is going to be I times radical 3 times I radical 12. That's I squared radical 36. But what's I squared? Negative 1 times 6 That's negative 6. Do you see why we can't do it the other way? Because we wouldn't get the same answer. So here's a big idea, and you should write this down in your own words. When you simplify a radical, if there's a negative under the radical, pull I out immediately. Then you can simplify or multiply or divide second. Otherwise, we get two different answers. So it's sort of like with order of operations. You need to have an order of operations, otherwise you can get so many different answers. But let me say it again. Anytime you have a negative under a radical, pull I out first. So let's try that in letter B. Initially, this will be I radical 48 minus I radical 27. And then the faster and better you get at this, you can pull your common factors out with the I. That's okay. But I'm trying to do this nice and slowly. Well, what is the biggest perfect square that's inside 48? It's a factor. 16, right? 16 times 3. So that'll be 4I radical 3 minus, what's the biggest perfect square factor of 27? 9. So this will be 3I radical 3. Now these both have a radical 3 and they both have an I, so I can combine them to just 1I radical 3, or I radical 3. All right, letter C. I have negative 1 plus radical negative 3, the quantity squared. So what I told you is that you need to immediately pull out the I. And then when I have a quantity squared, it does mean you're going to take it times itself. So that's negative 1 plus I radical 3 times the quantity negative 1 plus I radical 3. So let's FOIL. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. The outer is going to be minus I radical 3. The inner will be minus I radical 3. And then the last is going to give me I squared times, okay, I times I is I squared, but what's radical 3 times radical 3? It's just 3. So this becomes 1 minus 2I radical 3, and isn't I squared equal to negative 1? So that's a minus 3, so it's negative 2 minus 2I radical 3. Now I want to point something out to you, because what I said is we want A plus BI. The only exception to that rule is if you have, it's not a fraction, but if you have a radical, we usually don't put I after the radical because then it might look like it's underneath. But if I have, say, radical 3 over 2I, that's a fraction, so I is clearly on the side. Okay. All right, now, example 4 says solve x squared plus 4 equals 0. So we did this in Algebra 2. We reviewed it in that prerequisite chapter. This is called the square root property. You're going to get the x squared alone. But now we're going to allow for negatives under the square root. So this is x equals plus or minus 2I. All right, letter B does not factor. So what's another tool we have in our tool belt for a quadratic formula? So are you guys up for singing? You guys ready? Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. X equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So here we go. Negative negative 2 plus or minus the square root negative 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times 5, and that's all over 2 times 3. Remember, the fraction bar is underneath everything. It's even underneath the negative b. So I have 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 60. That's 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 56. Alright, well 4 goes into 56 14 times, but I need to pull that negative out, so I'm going to pull in square root of negative 4 and say that that's 2I, and then break it apart. 2 over 6 plus or minus 2 radical 14 over 6 with I on the side. So I'm getting two answers here, 1 over 3 plus or minus radical 14 over 3I. Alright, the back of your notes is blank, so we're going to do just a few extra practice problems here. Okay, so turn your paper over. Try these 4. 1, 2, and 3, I did problems just like these in the notes, but number 4, I didn't do anything just like it. However,